These actions are going to make sure that the banking system is safe and sound.
The American banking system is really safe and well capitalized. It's resilient.
I mean, who believes that? Like, how can you possibly believe these people who have lied to you about everything forever? Jack Hanney is here. He's the CEO of Patriot Gold Group, a man I trust on all this, a man who for a long time has seen all of this coming, and it's all coming to fruition. Jack, how are you, brother?
Mike, thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
No, I'm grateful you're here, and I'm grateful for your wisdom and your insight in all of this stuff. I want to get to, they were talking about the banking system, so I want to get to like the runs on the banks and the collapsing of banks in just a second. But one thing we've talked a lot about today is the end of the US dollar as the reserve currency. This is not getting nearly enough attention, and I feel like it's devastating, but I want to know exactly how and get more people to be aware of that. So that's the first question, is what does this mean? And then what is the, if we do lose the dollar as the reserve currency, what does that mean for gold?
Well, there's a global trend right now, a de-dollarization trend, especially with the development of BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Germany, and even Mexico. 19 other countries have applied to be a part of BRICS. It's the hottest ticket in town, which is a new basket reserve currency. Many speculate that it'll be backed by a basket of commodities, primarily gold, silver, natural gas, and oil. And this really began with this administration imposing such harsh sanctions on Russia. So when Russia invaded Ukraine and this administration imposed sanctions, seizing oligarchs' yachts and kicking Russia out of the SWIFT banking system, Saudi Arabia, China, Russia really started pushing. There's this global trend right now to move away from the dollar as the dominant reserve currency.
What an interesting unintended consequence that I wonder if they even considered when they decided to do all those things, like kicking Russia out of SWIFT and all that other stuff. So if this happens, when this happens, because as we talked about earlier, there's been a lot of reserve currencies, and I'm sure every single person who lived during a reserve currency thought they'd always be the reserve currency, and it never lasts forever. So when this does happen, what does that mean for gold?
Well, a few things. We've all read about and heard about China and their stratospheric stockpiling of gold over the last, 6 quarters, as well as even Russia, Saudi Arabia as well. And what we're looking at is this new basket reserve currency, BRICS, would be backed by a basket of commodities, primarily gold and silver. What will happen then is demand will so overpower supply that we've heard forecasts from Jefferies Group of over $5,500 an ounce. We're hearing from Wells Fargo and Bank of America of $3,000 an ounce gold, and gold today sits at $2,000.
Because they would not be as foolish as we are to not have it backed by something, right? They would back it with something.
Well, ever since Nixon took us off the gold standard back in 71, and we went from a gold-backed dollar to a fiat currency, meaning that it's backed by nothing, what we've only seen is the US dollar devalue by about 92% and lose about 92% of its purchasing power. We saw this over the past 2 years with the trillions of dollars that this government has printed, that the US dollar has lost about 14% of its purchasing power. One thing I do want to mention, I'm not a certified financial investment advisor, nor do I give tax advice, but what I can tell you, I've been on the front lines here in gold now for over 15 years, and the demand for physical gold has increased tenfold just over the last 3 years.
I bought some from you. Got this, a couple others as well. So let's go to the bank runs and bank collapses. It started with, what was the first one? Silicon Valley, right? And
Silicon Valley.
you kept being told, oh, it's great, it's fine. Yeah, no problem. Everything's great. Banking system's great, fantastic. and like was the third biggest bank collapse ever. And then it was a couple others, like it's been like two big ones now. There's like three total, and I don't see it necessarily ending. So what does that mean for gold?
Well, you played a clip with, Biden and then Janet Yellen. But Warren Buffett, who I trust quite a bit more, said that many more regional banks will collapse. Now, this started with Silicon Valley Bank, and then it was Signature Bank, but then it moved on to Credit Suisse, and then First Republic Bank, which is the 14th largest bank in the United States. 3 of the largest 30 banks in the United States have since collapsed in the last 2 months. So what we are seeing is contagion within the regional banks, these smaller banks with these toxic loans, with the feds raising interest rates. So there's a lot of concern out there about the FDIC, your deposits, the money you may have in the banks. A lot of people have over $250 in the bank, and they have concerns about the FDIC. They raised it from $100,000 to $250 back in 2008 during that whole too big to fail crises, the subprime mortgage crises. But what we're seeing right now, hack west of Beverly Hills, we're seeing a regional bank collapse right now, and Americans are concerned about not only the FDIC, but their deposits being insured and the availability of their funds in the banking system.
And what does that mean for gold, or what can gold do to alleviate some of those concerns?
Well, so what they're doing is they're putting their, paper fiat currencies, like we were just talking about, into physical gold. It's been a storage of wealth for 5,000 years. There's no counterparty risk. It can be converted into any other currency globally. So look, it's what central banks are doing. So if central banks, which are the ones responsible for turning on the printing presses, if they are stockpiling stratospheric amounts of gold, right, it's do what the central banks are doing. So basically what Americans are doing is they are acting as their own central banks and purchasing physical gold and silver for the preservation of wealth and the preservation of the purchasing power. And it's been time tested now over centuries.
Yeah, makes sense. We're talking about this is the concept here of safety. Where's a safe place? I think we're all looking for a safe place to put our money. Obviously you want good returns, but right then now even maybe safety is a part of it. So Morgan Stanley the other day talked about commercial real estate, and that's always been assumed to be an absolute no-brainer, gangbuster investment to make, and a safe one. What did they warn about that?
Well, it always was commercial real estate, but then you had COVID, and now you have the transition from the workplace to working from home. And we're finding lower Manhattan, New York City, we're finding downtown Los Angeles, these commercial real estate buildings vacant. And Morgan Stanley warned just 2 weeks ago that the commercial banking crisis is going to be worse than the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. And there's an old saying, if you owe the bank $1 million, you have a problem. But if you owe the bank $1 billion, the bank has a problem. And at the end of the day, the owners of these commercial real estate buildings, they're not collecting rent, so they're not paying the mortgage, and it all goes back to the bank, right? So what we're looking at are these vacant commercial buildings in these massive metropolitan areas, Chicago, downtown New York, LA, where the owner of the building isn't collecting rent. The owner of the building then is not able to make their mortgage payments to the bank that holds the loan on these commercial buildings. And one thing you did mention, Mike, regarding the preservation of wealth and the preservation of the purchasing power of the dollar, there's a quote by Will Rogers. I'm more concerned with the return of my money than the return on my money. And insurance is best bought before you think you need it.
Oh, that's such a good line. Okay, so I love this conversation. I love talking about this stuff, even though, well, it's like downer because like I don't love to think about the collapse of the US economy, although clearly that's where we headed. So I do like to live in reality, and I do have a little bit of hope in physical gold and silver. So there's a positive lining at the end of all this. But I love looking at dots and connecting them, right? And that's what we've done here a little bit. You just did, right? Okay, work from home means no rent, means they can't pay their bills, which means bank collapse, right? Like I like connecting dots. Can you give us a few more, or maybe we can go back into history even, about some economic factors that are coming together now that you see being bad for the economy, but good for gold? And I want to know why it's good for gold so that we can make wise decisions and prepare against these dots that are clearly connecting.
Well, there's another quote, Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And we look at 70s era inflation. We look at the stagflationary period of the 70s. We look at what happened with interest rates there in the late 70s, early 80s, the Carter administration. We look at gold hitting all-time highs back then in 1980, as well as silver hitting $50 an ounce. And the parallels, if we also look at the parallels of 2000, the dot-com bubble, and what's happened here over these 12 years, right? With these outrageous valuations of these tech companies. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of parallels of 2000. As a matter of fact, back in 2000, right, the dot-com bubble, the stock market lost 40% of its value. But what a lot of people don't know, and it's not in the media, it's not in the news, and you don't read about it, was that in 2001 and 2002, the stock market lost another 50% of its value. So if you really look back over time, if you look back over 1929, if you look over the late 70s and early 80s, and then you go to 2000, and then you go again to 2008 and the subprime mortgage crisis, and we talk about the commercial real estate mortgage crisis, right? It's cyclical. It's cyclical. And that's why the most dangerous words on Wall Street are, this time it's different, right? This time is different. It's worse.
Can we please learn from it? All right, Jack Hanney, CEO, Patriot Gold Group. Jack, your team's always been awesome. I've called many times, worked with a lot of people over there to buy all the gold I have from you and only from you. So I'm grateful for that. Give my best to your team. What's the best way people get in touch with you guys?
Well, and thank you, Mike, and we appreciate it. They can go to www.patriotgoldgroup.com or call 1-800-974-4653. That's www.patriotgoldgroup.com or call 1-800-974-GOLD.
Hey, I'm Mike Slater. Thanks so much for watching that clip. If you want to see more truth like that, please subscribe to the first YouTube page. Just hit subscribe below.